Pleasure. Thank you very much, Phil. Yes, sorry, I'm Ieuan Hopkins. I'm the Archives, Records and Information Compliance Manager at BAS, or actually if that job title is too long for our system, so I'm actually the Archives, Records and Information Compliance Man at BAS, which is good. I'll ask you to just get knocked off. I'm not a historian, I'm not a geographer, I'm an archivist. So my role today is really to give you an overview of the BAS archives, what we've got in it, with some obviously relevance to South Georgia, and sort of think about and explain how BAS currently uses the archives. Actually, really what it is to whet your appetite. As we go through, you'll see images, I'll mention the sort of material we have. If there's anything in there that you think that sounds interesting, I must come back and have a closer look. You're very welcome. The BAS archives is a place of deposit. So we're the equivalent of the National Archives. So if we weren't here, a lot of the records would be at the National Archives, and obviously we have the same levels of preservation and access that you'd expect from the National Archives. So we are open to the public. So if there's anything I say you think, oh, great, that would be really helpful, you're very welcome to come back and have a closer look. Not all at once, I have to say, but yeah, by appointment. I should say, so the archive itself is just downstairs. I had a quick look on the archives catalogue. There's 53,000 entries on the archives catalogue. And of those, a quick search for South Georgia brought up about 5,000. So South Georgia material, South Georgia and Bird Island represents very roughly about 10% of the archive as a whole. So it's a significant chunk of records downstairs. BAS. This is a question about how does the archive support BAS? Well, BAS, there we go. That's from our website. The vision is to be a world-leading centre, polar science and polar operations, issues of global importance, operational professionalism and innovation, complex operations, all of this sort of stuff. So we're big, we're shiny, we use really modern equipment, we're using AI, drones, big red ships, big red aircraft, all this. And downstairs there's a room full of bits of old paper. And sometimes the two are a little bit sort of anachronistic. So really the question is, how do we support that? Archivists experience the world vicariously, and that's probably really true in this company. So some of what I'm going to say you may know already, some of what I'm going to show you may have been, some of what you see you may have actually taken a photo of. Sorry, John, there's one of yours coming up a bit later. But the BAS archives, if you don't know, so BAS started in the Second World War as Operation Tabarin. There you go, Adrian, there's a proper map for you. This dates from this is actually on the Antarctic Peninsula, so Hope Bay. After the Second World War, Operation Tabarin was put on a permanent footing, came under the control of the Colonial Office, and we became the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey. In 1962, FIDS changed its name to BAS, and then in 1967, the Natural Environment Research Council, NERC, took control of this. So the origins of BAS really start in Second World War with Operation Tabarin, and the archives contain material from that time to the present. And I was going to say everything's a bold statement, but a huge amount of material. We've got scientific, we've got logistic, we've got the living and working, we've got personal, photographic, film, audio. It's an incredibly sort of dense archive. There's a lot in there. I have colleagues that work in archives with medieval manuscripts and scrolls and seals and all this sort of stuff. And my archive only goes back 80 years. So sometimes I feel a little bit inadequate, but actually it's a really dense, really important collection. The sort of things we've got. There we go. There's a photo. Some of you will recognize that. That's from 1951. So that's, showing the government station down from Dews Hill. Part of the record that BAS produces is a basin field report. Some of you will have written a number of these. Every station, every year, for every activity, you write a report, and BAS has all of these. And again, they go back to Operation Tabarin, and it's a continuous series all the way through. So 4 basin field reports for KEP. There's 462 of them downstairs, covering 1949 to 2021. Full range of activities, and there's 150 sort of covering biology and botany. And as I said, these are reports written by the individuals who were there, who were collecting the data. Sometimes they're incredibly detailed, sometimes they're 2 paragraphs. It depends on the individual's characteristics, I think, and personality, but they're a really, really rich source of information. And Bird Island, this is a photograph taken by a certain John Croxall. Sorry, John. So again, this is from 1980, but again, the basin field reports from Bird Island, there's 182 reports, again, from 1977 to 2021, and there's 60 of those that cover ornithology, marine biology, that type of thing. So they're a really, really rich source of information. So that's part of the formal record. There's also the informal record. So you have this image. Oh, yes, this is 1958-59, taken by Dennis Bell. It shows a group of FIDs waiting at the jetty on King Edward Point. You might be interested in what the infrastructure was like at that time. You might be interested in sort of BAS's modes of operation and travel and logistics. You might be interested in late 50s FIDs fashions. I don't know. We get all sorts. But actually, this is a really nice sort of informal photo, but it kind of sparks something. A lot of FIDs went south to lots of different stations, but very many of them came through South Georgia, came through KEP as a kind of staging post. So there's a lot of information, certainly photographs in the archive, that kind of relate to that idea, sort of transiting through the first experience of sort of getting off the boat and seeing a bit of the Antarctic. So you begin to get something of that coming through. So we got this one. So this is of Leith Harbour. This is taken by Robert Moss in 1949. So again, he's not based there. He's not staying there. He's jumped off the boat. He's seen this place. He's taken some photos and he's hopped back on again. But there are, again, a lovely kind of snapshot of what was happening. Another one. Again, this is by Robert Moss again, still transiting through Leith Harbour. You might not be able to see, but the John Biscoe is the small ship moored against the much larger ship, which I think is called the Southern Gardner oil transport ship. So it gives you an idea of the scale of the vessels that they were travelling down on as well. And again, another one from Leith Harbour. So this was taken by a surveyor from FIDS, Norman Leopard, in 1956. Not on South Georgia, he's moving through, but he's capturing these images as he goes. And Grytviken from 1949-50, somewhere in there. They're beautiful, beautiful images. As I said, a lot of this in the archive, we've got thousands of images of icebergs. And these are usually the first iceberg. If you're traveling down on the ship, you see your first iceberg, you run to your cabin, you get your camera, you take a photo. 50 years later, we get the transparency in the archives. We've got thousands of them. South Georgia is very, very similar. There's a large amount of information captured in the images of South Georgia that were taken by these sort of people transiting through. This was taken by Dick Laws, who's a name that you'll be familiar with. And we're going to come through a few more names in a minute of people that you'll be very familiar with. Dick was... Yeah, sorry, he was a whaling inspector in the 1950s. And we've got a large amount of Dick Laws' paperwork, his photographs, his art as well. But actually a lot of his records, so we've got the raw data that he's collecting, his field notes and sort of work on elephant seals and other sort of large mammals down there as well. And they're in the archive. So I asked at the beginning, you know, how do the archive help BAS now? The most straightforward thing is this idea of long-term data sets. So the Polar Data Center collects current data, but actually those data sets are extended back in time through the data and the metadata in the archives. As I said, stretching from, you know, wartime, Second World War, through to now, we've got those long-term data sets. If you're interested in changing environments, you know, it's a good place to start. Here's another example. So this is Lance Tickow's work on Bird Island. So I think this dates from 1955. You can't see it very clearly, but all the dots are different, and the key gives you an idea. The different species of bird on Bird Island at that point, which Lance, we do it by satellite now, as Adrian's alluded to, but actually, the real data when it's first collected is boots on the ground, tramping around, seeing what you can see and noting it on the map. And again, we've got a huge amount of Lance's work in the archive, a lot of the raw data, worked up notes, all these sort of things as well. And actually, these are really important to BAS as well. The sort of unified and the larger scientific projects that BAS undertakes now kind of started off like this, usually maybe one or two interested people who were in a location for a certain amount of time and sort of wandered off and almost kind of started looking at things as a bit of a hobby. So you get these sort of nascent scientific programs developing, and from that you get a lot of the BAS scientific work that followed. It's not just biology. So that's Hodges Glacier, 1974. So this is done by Robert Hayward, Ieuan Hogg, and Roger Timmis, which again are probably names that are familiar to some of you. And Pete Prince, obviously. Pete Prince. So this is him in 1972 and 73. And again, as with some of the other names, we've got a huge amount of information that Peter's collected, his field notebooks, the raw data, etc. A whole range of things. And a wonderful photograph. And the South Georgia surveys. Yeah, so we've got the data in the archive, the aerial photographs, the imagery from 1972 through to 2005, which again, it's a really long span of time and still continuing. It's a really, really important data set. So that's all straightforward. We've got the data, extend it back in time, we can learn from it. The archive also has data that can be used in new ways. This isn't South Georgia or Bird Island, I'm afraid, but it's a good analogy. Dom Hodgson, who's currently the interim director of science, has spent a lot of time looking at geologists and surveyors' field notebooks. He's interested in sea level change, and snow petrels sort of regurgitate something called mumio, which is a kind of stomach acid, crystallized stomach acid, which persists in the environment for about 40,000 years, I think is the longest amount of time. So if you go and find a snow petrel nest and you analyze the mumio, you can work out how long the nest has been there, which will tell you something about the sea level, when it may have been covered by water or how long it's been out of water. But actually the chemical analysis as well will tell you the sort of things that the bird was eating, which can also indicate how far away from open water it was. Which is fantastic. It's like a sort of mini archive in Mumio. The only problem is the snow petrel nests are fairly few and far between. The only way to find them is by wandering around the Antarctic Peninsula until you come across a snow petrel nest, which is far too time consuming. But fortunately, the surveyors and the geologists of the past were doing just that, wandering around. And in their field notebooks, they'd record the location of the snow petrel nests. So by spending a few months in the archive, going through these field notebooks, you can identify the points of interest for the following season or the season after that, and then you can go and hit these snow petrel nests and analyze them. So it's information in the archive, but being used in a completely different way for which it was first sort of undertaken. So we always say, we get scientists in the archive when we introduce it to them, if you've got a question, ask us. The answer might not be immediately obvious, but somewhere in there, there'll be a question. We'll find the answer for you. The other good thing it does, so this is an image, again, through surveying. From the surveyor's records across the peninsula as a whole, you can see what areas have been visited, but actually importantly, what are the, I suppose, pristine areas, the areas not visited by man. So again, that's an important kind of part of the data we've got downstairs. The reason I chose this image, the other thing this does is there's something really romantic about this. This is sort of coinciding with people's perceptions of Antarctica. If you ask someone to imagine a photo of a surveyor crossing the continent into virgin territory, or AI might come up with something like that. And this is where sort of the archive flips over a little bit. We've done the straightforward scientific data. Now we're talking about something else, and it's the experience. It's the living and working in Antarctica. So Adrian talked about Duncan Cass earlier. There we go. There's Duncan Cass having his beard trimmed, as one must, on one of the South Georgia expeditions. And again, this is another sort of, it's the living and working. What do you do in Antarctica? How do you get your beard trimmed? You get your mate to do it, obviously wearing goggles. Not just beards being trimmed. You might need a little bit of dental work as well while you're on there. So this is Kevin Walton having his tooth stopped by Smiley on the Spencerley Glacier, if you're interested. BAS has got a long history of undertaking dental work remotely by unskilled individuals. And there's a rather good recording as well that we've got from the radio with the doctor in one station, the tooth extraction happening somewhere else. And halfway through, there's a thud, which is one of the people in the room fainting and falling over. So we're good at that. But I think what's important, and what's important to BAS as well, this idea of living and working. BAS, if you work in it, there's a sense of continuity that comes from living and working at BAS. People are aware that their history goes back 80 years, and they're part of a lineage of people, and many of you in the room will be aware of that. That's important to BAS for a number of reasons. If you think of the sort of overarching strategy and a vision at the beginning of the talk, expertise in polar matters and all this sort of stuff. Well, that expertise is kind of hard won, and it's built on this experience, 80 years of operating in this environment and living and working in this environment, and that's passed into sort of BAS culture and people. I think it's passed in several ways. So actually, informally, the methods that we use, some of them are very similar. So this is a field camp from Operation Tabarin. It's not that dissimilar from something later on in the 1960s. The tents are very similar. The boxes are similar. The premises are similar, in some cases the same, I think. The bobble hats, the beards, all that sort of thing persists through time. And actually, without the date of that picture, I'm very unclear of when it was taken. It could have been 5 years ago, it could have been 50 years ago. We don't know, because there's a lot of similarities. So you get this kind of, oral tradition, passing this information down, living with and working with the same equipment, talking to the people who've used it in the field, them giving you their experience and you then passing it on and sharing it. So it's a really kind of real, if you work in BAS, a real feeling of continuity. And that's what underpins all this sort of operational professionalism and things that we're shouting about to the public. There's this kind of 80 years of hard work. It's this kind of accumulation of knowledge and expertise. So obviously the archive facilitates that. So this is, so it's an aerial photograph. This is up by Halley. It's an air photograph. And this is a route from a travel journey out by sledge. And this was the easiest way to pass this information on to people that would subsequently maybe want to go up to Christmas Box Hill. Literally off the map, but there's just enough annotation there. So the archive facilitates it. The other thing, the archive demonstrates it as well, which is why it's important to BAS. It's part of our experience, it's part of our memory, and it's actually part of our identity. So it's a sort of dual purpose. It's a bit like a map, Adrian may agree. So a map's got two purposes. It's a sort of pragmatic, it can get you from A to B, but it's symbolic. We've mapped this place, we understand it, we have some control over it. And that's I think, a very good analogy for what the archive does as well. It's a pragmatic element to it and a symbolic element in terms of, sort of identity construction, which is why BAS has the archive, I think. That's my argument to senior management anyway. Don't take my word for it. BAS is also on the UNESCO UK Memory of the World Register, the BAS archive, which means actually if you did write one of those base and field reports, they've been accorded the same status as Winston Churchill's wartime speeches. That's good to know. But you can see on the UNESCO site, it talks about the archive as a remarkable and rich insight into a small island's past and mark on the world. It's Britain's collective memory. not just BAS. It's the same thing for BAS, but this is, bigger than that. This is about British collective memory. And it's the leading role, United Kingdom's leading role. And part of that, as I say, a crude rule of thumb measurement, 10% of that is related to South Georgia and about the activities that the people in this room and the people that have been to South Georgia have been undertaking over the past 70 years or so. So it's got this, two purposes. I left that one and Phil picked this up saying that's a duplicate. I was going to make a really bad joke, which is I hope that hasn't been like a trip to the dentist for you and it's been interesting. But if you've got any questions, I can take some now. Thank you.
I think that was wonderful and certainly makes me feel proud to have been part of BAS, and I hope those that were also part of BAS feel exactly the same. So there must be loads of questions. I will throw it, but I don't know if John can catch.
There we go. Excellent talk, Ieuan. I've got a question about oral histories. I've just come back from Dundee, and the South Georgia Heritage Trust launched their Whalers Memory Bank there. And looking at some of the photos here, I was wondering, have you had or undertaken oral histories of people in this room, for example, people like John Croxall, people are very acknowledged as being sort of leading scientists on South Georgia. Have you undertaken oral histories of any BAS staff on South Georgia? And if you have, you should link them to the Whalers Memory Bank on South Georgia to enrich the collection of stories about South Georgia.
Absolutely.
So that's my question. Any oral histories of...
Yes, 386. Across, so starting with Operation Tabarin and going through probably good coverage through the 50s and 60s, some coverage into the 70s. They're all available online, transcription and the actual audio recordings on the BAS Club website, but there is a link through from the BAS archives section of the BAS website as well. We need to pick it up and do more, but it's quite a large undertaking to transcribe 386 two-hour-long interviews. But yeah, no, we will get there. It's a good question. They're a really rich source of information. And actually, I'd say most of the researchers that come to the archive will, at some point, spend time, listening to them, reading them. You get that. It's really valuable. I think hearing the voices, it's all very well reading the base and field reports about, the 10 guys stuck in a wooden hut for 6 months over the winter, and maybe there are some tensions. So when you listen to those 10 accents and characters that come out through the voice, that's when the picture really starts to sort of foment in your mind. I think it's really interesting. But yeah, no, thanks, John. They're a really good resource.
You've seen that picture up there. Does the archive cover all the operations which are taken? Because I can think of at least two. One was quite an incredible one where the base commander had to take out a certain person's appendix being told the way through from the Falkland Islands. Another one more close to home was when we had to put someone's leg back together again. He had a comminuted compound fracture of his tibia and fibula. And the photographer who was detailed to do that couldn't stand the sight of blood. So he was actually fainting quite regularly, but I'm sure that those would be fascinating in the archive.
I can't remember those specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if we'll certainly have the report on it. I'm surprised you want to revisit it, actually, but yeah. Yeah, I think the great thing about the archive is that you look at you can take one event and you can look at it from lots of directions. You've got the formal record, the formal file, you've got the photographic, but you've got these informal recollections in diaries and journals and oral histories and things. So there's a whole wealth of material. I think there's one just behind you.
Hi there. We've got Pat Lurcock in the room, I think. Do we? Is Pat here? Is he not? Okay, sorry. I was just thinking about, you know, the cemeteries website that Pat's done and, you know, how much interest there is from people whose families may have been buried on the island, and thinking about all of the BAS teams that are working on South Georgia, and whether, you know, there's some sort of a record of the BAS staff that have been on island over the years that their families could maybe look up.
We've got, so we've absolutely got the record in the archive. I don't know how accessible it is online. There is the Winters database, which is slightly different and partial in some areas, but no, we've got, yeah, we get families coming in quite a lot. Actually, it's all my, you know, my grandfather was south. I know he was in Antarctica, but I don't know anything about him. And actually, you can recreate the journey from, you know, the date he got on the ship at Southampton, you know, stopping off at Montevideo and going down, and the movement south as well, with all the photographs and recollections. There's a huge amount of yeah, information that can lead to that sort of the family history and compiling those sort of statistics. It's, yeah, it's a chunk of work to do, but you'd be more than welcome to come in and make a start.
Good. Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.
No,
That
pleasure.
was,